Hey, welcome back to the shop. I'm Jason, and I've got a really interesting thought for you. Did you know that on average, $34 billion a year are lost by insurance companies to fraud? And primarily, that's due to auto insurance fraud. Do you drive around a bunch and you see the dimwits out there in the world? They're not all just dimwits. Some of them are trying to take advantage of the system. And the only way to protect yourself is to have evidence that you didn't do something wrong. And that's where dash cams come into play. You want to catch the stupidity and be able to prove that it wasn't you. So today I'm going to be installing this Viofo A119 V3 in my 2016 BMW X5. So let's take a look at what you get in the box. To start, you get your instruction manual, cords, the camera. In this case, I'm going to be running GPS as well, but if you're not running GPS, you're going to get two different mounts for your windshield, one of them with a slight wedge and one of them with a straight profile. That way you can try to get the lens adjusted to fit the needs of your vehicle. You get your car charger with two ports, that way you can plug the camera in and you can plug something else in and not lose that charging space. You have a cord to plug into your computer, what I call from the automotive world a bone tool or a trim tool for moving the trim in your car and trying to line up where this cable is going to go. And then you get a bunch of little mounts, anti-static pads, and a spare sticky pad to attach it to the windshield. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to compare the quality of this camera to a camera that's more widely known, a GoPro. This is a Hero 7, and then also the dash cam that I have in my truck currently. I don't have a dash cam in my X5 because the last one melted here in the Phoenix heat. So let's get into what you do first after you get the camera out of the box, or at the very least, what I did first, so that I'm not trying to work in the car and push the buttons and get everything going. So right out of the box, the first thing that I did was I downloaded the firmware update from the Black Box My Car website, which led me to the Viofo itself. And I added that onto my micro SD card and popped that into the camera here. Then when you plug in the camera, and right now I just have it plugged into a USB port, it automatically updated the firmware to version 2.6. I do this with all my different electronics to make sure that I'm operating with whatever software is right for today. So we hit OK. And then I adjusted the resolution to 4K 30 frames per second, my bitrate to high, loop recording, I'm picking 3 minutes because I think that at 3 minutes you'd be able to get about the information that you're gonna need. Your video format, MP4 versus a TS file. Exposure, I'm not going to adjust. HDR I have on for a higher dynamic range while it's recording. It will take up more space on my memory card. For driver safety, it's set to off, and I'm going to leave that off for now. I don't need any extra beeps in the car. And driver fatigue alarm, just the same. Parking mode, I'm not going to be hardwiring this camera to a spare battery, and in the car I'm going to be wiring it to a key on ignition source, so parking mode isn't going to work the way that I would like it to. Parking mode timer, duration, G sensor I have on, motion detection off, time-lapse recording off, motion detection off, GPS because we did get a GPS unit, set to on, speed, I adjusted to miles per hour. The G sensor is on low sensitivity, and what that does is it automatically records in the event of an impact, and it locks that file. Date stamp, GPS info, camera model stamp are all turned on. I have recording audio on. Screensaver is set to 1 minute, and that will turn off. Boot delay, LED is on, so I'll know that it's recording. I set my date and time zone, language, turn the beep off as you can hear. Frequency, I'm not changing because it's not plugged into 120. Image rotation, I'm going to keep flat. Image mirror, flat. and I had already formatted the SD card prior to downloading the firmware. Format warning, that tells you if you need to. I'm gonna leave that off. Default settings, I don't have a car number, and I'm not adding any custom text. Now that we have this ready to go, at least from our settings standpoint, we can start planning how we're going to install it. So for the actual comparison of the two dash cams, the GoPro is kind of for fun. I'm going to compare them on 3 different aspects. The first being ease of installation. Did they come with everything that you need to run them out of the box? 2, value. Do I feel like I'm getting a good value as far as feature set, options for the money? And 3, image quality. Is it even worth it? If it's cheap and the image sucks, then it's not worth it, right? And in fairness and all honesty, Blackbox My Car reached out to me and they offered to send me this camera for free to see if I liked it. And they said that I can give you an honest review, which I fully intend to do. There's no point in me saying something's good and then everybody hating it. If it's good, it is. If it isn't, don't buy it. All right, so first things first, we need to figure out where we're going to install this guy up on the windshield. And we need to make sure that it's out of the way of all of the sensors that this car, or really any modern car, is going to have. And on this car, the mirror has a light sensor here behind it, and then inside of the box, it has a number of other sensors, whether it be radar cameras or otherwise. Depending on your vehicle, that's all going to play into account here. So what we can do is we can plug in our charger or our adapter, at least to get a baseline here, and plug into our camera to hold it up and see where on the windscreen it's gonna fit the best, be the least obstructive, and make sure that it has a good line of sight out the front of the car. Now, if you have a GPS mount, you go ahead and plug directly into the GPS mount. If you don't, there's a plug on the side of the camera that you'll be plugging into, and it notates that in the instructions. So you can see we're lit up, and the camera's gonna boot up here in just a second. There we go. Now we can see on screen. For now, we're just going to extend our cord, let it run wild, and up over the mirror here to try to find a nice location. Now what I'm looking for is, depending on your location, either in states or in the world, you may have rules that apply to where you can put your camera, so you really want to double check on those. Most of the rules have something to do with obstructing the driver's field of view. Whether you're on a left-hand or a right-hand drive, you know, that's going to be dependent. I think I can mount the camera fairly high here in the dot matrix of the windshield and still have a clear view for the sensor to see out. And then I'll be running the cord up and around the top of the windshield, down the A-pillar, and then into the dash. We'll get into that in just a minute, taking it apart. Now my screen is already turned off because of the screensaver. But I think square with the vehicle, about right there, is going to give me the best field of view to work with. So let's go ahead and we're going to glue our GPS mount and camera right up there using the two-sided adhesive that's provided. Before we stick our camera mount up, I went ahead and I cleaned off the glass here, and I'm not going to be using the anti-static film to go up there, which actually makes it much easier to remove if you want to take the camera sticky part off later, because here in Phoenix, I'm not really sure it's going to hold up to the heat, and I'm going to hedge my bets and just go with the actual two-sided adhesive. Should do it. Give it a firm press. I'll go ahead and unplug that for now. pop the camera off, so I'm not forcefully pushing on the camera too hard, and then I'll give it a little more pressure on the GPS portion, which is what's stuck to the windshield. Okay, I'm sure you can already see, got this other cable here dangling down. Well, this was from my previous camera, and it runs down and in through the dash. We're gonna follow the same path with our new cable, but before we do so, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the A-pillar cover, which incidentally is also covering an airbag here. So do this at your own risk, obviously. I would take a look at whatever vehicle you have to make sure that you're not gonna do anything detrimental to your health or your vehicle as you're pulling these trims off. To start on my X5 here, I'm gonna use the provided trim tool to pop out the trim cover that says airbag here. There we go. You can see it popped out to there, and then we have to get past the tab to pull it the rest of the way. Those little tabs are all that's holding it in. And we're able to remove it with no damage. The next step will be to pull the screw out that's retaining it. And in this case, it's a T25 Torx. I'm using a right angle adapter on my little impact here. Then we're gonna go back to our trim tool again to pop the trim out. It's gonna have clips, more than likely across here, as well as being retained by this door seal just by pressure. And be careful as you're pulling this out, again, not to break anything. Just kidding. While this isn't advice, you're unlikely to cause any harm to the airbag removing the trim. It's designed to come apart that way. So you can see I ran my old cable through the headliner here, up and around, following the actual body harness down, and then through the dash and inside. We'll do the same with our new cable here. Now, if you were uncomfortable with pulling the trim off or trying to stuff the cable up behind your headliner, these little cable clips came in the kit, and you run the cable through there and you can lock them in place and then discreetly hide these little clips right up against the trim all the way down to feed the wire down into your dash, into your power supply, which would be a great option in most instances if you're not super comfortable with this or having somebody else install the cable for you. Now, for the vast majority of you, you're not going to go too much further than potentially pulling this trim off or running the cable down, and then you can tuck it along your seal here, under the dash, and to your adapter. Or potentially, if your car has an adapter in the glove box, that would be a great location as well. Or the cable is long enough that you could tuck it along the door seal and potentially to an adapter at the rear of your center console. In my case, I previously hardwired to my fuse box behind the dash a dual USB port that's connected to the ignition key turning on. So when the ignition key turns off, camera turns off. When it turns on, it turns on. I don't have any concerns of a battery draw at that point. If you're hardwiring using the provided hardwire kit, you want to make sure that you're doing the same, because if you connect it to a fuse that's on all the time, you run the distinct risk of draining the battery on your car and coming out not being able to start it, which is where any one of the additional supplemental battery kits come into play. Those are a whole different video for another time, so we're going to move ahead and plug into the USB port that we installed previously. If you're curious what that looks like, you can take a look at this video up here That's when I installed another one of these on my race car so that it had the same features and I could plug multiple USB devices in to a keyed on ignition switch. Let's start with the magic with where I hid everything behind this side access panel. On this car, the fuse panel, at least one of them, is hiding down under here. But through this side panel, I was able to hide all my wiring. So you can see our clips that lock in, and then the seal is retaining the rest of it. And we have this piece here at the top. And like I mentioned, here's my bundle of wires that are wired back and down to the fuse block. Okay, so you can see that I cleaned up that bundle of wires and I got my old USB cable out, and you can see the actual module. This is just a DC to DC converter so that I get 2 USB ports. You can see I added 1 USB port here for specific phone charging in the glove box, leaving me with the other one to whatever I want, which will be our camera here. So now we need to finish tucking this cable down through and pop it out this side. Okay, it's always important to make sure, I think, to wrap up all your extra cable in a nice, neat fashion. That way it's clean should you ever need to get back in there, and it's far less likely to rattle around and make noise. A couple of zip ties, some tape, and some foam will do you well in the long run. Now, last step, at least my last step, is to wrap it all up in some foam. Now, one more zip tie, keep it all in place. Now, before we go ahead and lock everything down and close up our cover, put our trim on, it's probably a good idea to connect the camera, turn the key on, and just make sure all of our work is sound and everything works, or everything turns on. First sign is the light turned on, that's good. And we boot up, just as we should. So now we can go ahead and put our trim, all of our little pieces of foam in the dash that we took out, and our side panel back together, just the reverse order that we took them apart. Okay, so change of scenery. Now we need to go over our 3 topics that we were going to judge these cameras by. I've got some daytime footage and some nighttime footage where we're going to look over and see just how good they are. But the first thing we're going to talk about is the ease of installation, which I'm giving 3 categories. Firmware update, because I think it's important to have some sort of back-end support, the buttons and how easy they are to use, and the adapters and everything that it came with. Could you install it straight out of the box? So right out of the gate, the Apeman, there was no firmware update. It's been a while since I've had that camera, and there is still no firmware update. Whereas the Viofo, there is a firmware update right out of the box. It was 2.5, I updated it to 2.6. That's great. The Apeman, the buttons are pretty funky to use. They're kind of clunky, the screens and the displays that you have to work through are a little confusing. I don't really like it. Where so far with the Viofo, it's been pretty easy to use, so I'm gonna give that a go. And the last thing, out of the box, can you install these, and is there everything that you needed to do so? And I'd say for both cameras, yeah, we're solid there. So our next category to break down is value. We're gonna break this up into 4 sections with price, features, options, and GPS. And to start right off the bat, the Apeman wins here because it's only $47.99 versus the $109.99 for the Viofo. Next category is features. And really, they both have very similar feature sets here with a screen, G-sensor, night mode, parking mode, a lot of what you're looking for. So I'm gonna say both of these are tied on this one. Options, they both have the option to be hardwired. Each kit is a little bit different, The Apeman has a plug-in to an OBD adapter, and the Viofo is a hardwire kit into the fuse box. And I'll give it to the Viofo here because their hardwire kit comes with an adjustable battery sensor so that you're not going to kill your battery, and I think that's pretty cool. Last category is GPS, which to me is a pretty important category. Seeing how fast and just exactly where you were when something happened, I think that that'd be really important documentation. In the Apeman, no GPS, Viofo, GPS. So giving this one to the Viofo. So we're going to start off with the Viofo driving down the street. You can see that this is the only one that films in 21:9 as an option, and I picked that so that I'd have the widest field of view. And we're doing a 200% zoom on all of these to see, can we read a street sign? I decided not to pick people's license plates because I don't really know how I feel about that or other people's privacy. Street signs are going to be right in that range. You can see that the Viofo, I could read it. The Apeman, you can read it. And coming up here with the GoPro, you can read the sign as well. There's a distinct color difference between these three cameras if you haven't already noticed. And honestly, I think that the Viofo has the best color with the GoPro leading up second. Next, we're looking at side by side. Can you see a pedestrian during the day and during the night? At night, none of these cameras did that great. Though the Viofo did have the best fidelity at night where you could actually see what was happening in the broadest range of the screen. And here you can actually read the street sign at 200%. So where does that leave us finishing out this review? Well, I'm going to be buying another camera for my truck. Seeing the quality difference for such a minimal investment, it's going to be time to make that change. I think that the small trade-offs at night, I can still see road signs. I don't show it, but you can read license plates when you zoom in on them. And the clarity during the daytime, coupled with the GPS, these are enough things to make me feel comfortable with upgrading the camera in my truck to this new Viofo A119 version 3. And I feel great about that. If you think that you're interested in purchasing a camera, we did work out a deal with Black Box My Car that if you use the link in the description and you buy something over $100, you'll save 5%. It'll help you, it'll help me, and it doesn't cost you any more. So I really appreciate you watching this video. I hope that you learned something about this camera specifically, maybe about putting a camera in your car if you have an X5. Like, subscribe, comment, do your thing, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.